canvassed some of the congregation and asked what they were doing 60 years ago today. And I've got a few replies, and it's quite interesting how it strikes a chord with people. So, first of all, Coronation Day, 2nd of June 1953. And I'm looking at the collective memory of some of the people here. Katie Rawlinson, who thought I wasn't listening when she was talking, spent a long time outside Jaeger in Regent Street and was entranced by the Queen dressed in silk. And the Queen seemed to be looking straight at her, and she was quite dazzled. That's to say, Katie was quite dazzled. Everybody got wet, but the wonderful Queen Salote of Tonga, a giant of a woman, travelled in an open carriage, and the crowd loved her for it. George Shalimo was at boarding school in Nigeria, and there was no mention at all of the coronation. He learned about it later. Hilary de Souza remembers a leather-bound book being presented to her as she was an older student. The younger students had to make do with the coronation mug. One parishioner was a scout on the route, and his main memory is getting very wet, but there were a lot of people. David Saltmarsh went to a friend's house and watched what was the first television programme that he'd ever seen. Brian Simpson was on the route of the procession, and not only was he waiting for the royal carriage, but he was waiting to be called up into the services. A few days ago I met a patient in Harefield Hospital who, ironically, as a small child, was in hospital for the coronation, and the rest of his family camped along the Mall without him. David Chippendale heard the coronation on the radio, as did a great many people in those times, and David Saltmarsh was most impressed with the music, and particularly Zadok the priest. And years later, he had an opportunity to join a giant choir in the Albert Hall, and there were 60 tenors alone and 1,000 sopranos. So that really gave it plenty of variation. We still have at home the 1953 Bakelite television with a magnifying glass, which my wife Helen and her family bought for and watched the coronation of. Any office. I can remember the only TV in the family belonging to my aunt, and ranks of chairs were put out in a room, but no space for me. So while everybody was watching, I was passed from friends to relatives around and getting very fidgety. There was a street party later in the road, which was in Kilburn in northwest London, and the road was closed and it was decorated with bunting and appropriate posters. I came across, while I was researching what I wanted to say, 10 things we ought to know about the coronation. 129 nations and territories were officially represented. 129. It took the Royal School of Needlework 3,500 hours to complete the gold embroidery on the coronation robes. 29,200 officers and men took part in the processional route. Keith Richard was a 9-year-old choir boy before he became a Rolling Stone. And some may remember Martin Fugel, who conducted St Martin's Singers here not so very many years ago, and he was a former choir boy at the Abbey. A dish of pre-cooked cold chicken, raisins, herbs and spices, and a creamy mayonnaise-based sauce was invented for guests to enjoy, and was known and is still known as Coronation chicken. 82 applications were granted for roast oxen to be served. The BBC chose its 30 shortest cameramen so they could cram into tiny spaces, particularly above the organ loft in the Abbey. An estimated 27 million people in Britain watched the ceremony on TV, while 11 million listened on the radio. Also, as we know, on the 2nd of June 1953, Sir Edmund Hillary and Sherpa Tenzing Norgay reached the summit of Everest, and the Queen had the idea of presenting all 14 members of the expedition with special edition coronation medals with the extra wording, Mount Everest Expedition. Although Queen Elizabeth had succeeded her father on his death the year before, it wasn't until the 2nd of June 1953 that she was crowned. As the crowd watched, with 8,250 people crammed into the Abbey and 3 million lining the route, the 26-year-old monarch made a solemn promise to serve her country. The Queen maintains balance and humility through her interests outside of her royal role, family and horses, and famously corgi dogs. But her sense of duty comes before all. She is always guided by her Christian faith. At the millennium, she said, "For me, the teachings of Christ and my own accountability before God provide a framework in which I try to live my life." The Queen's last few Christmas broadcasts have demonstrated the intensity of her faith. She reminds Christians that the feast marks the birth of our Saviour, the Prince of Peace, who is our source of light and life in both good times and bad. In old age, she has underlined this message more heavily than she did in the past. Not in an obtrusive way that would offend non-Christians, but boldly enough to make some of us sit up from our post-lunch slumber and think she really believes what she says. Since the Queen ascended the throne, church-going in Britain, denominations, is down to less than half. The churches as institutions have suffered far greater damage than the monarchy. In fact, I came across one headline which read, "Is Queen Elizabeth II the true Christian leader of our country?" So somebody gave that a lot of thought. For 60 years, the Queen has defended not faith in the abstract, but the revelations of Christianity, and she has been more effective for doing so in a gentle and unassuming manner. And I guess I have to end this by saying, God save the Queen.